On Christmas Eve of 2024, I was officially deported from Saigon in Vietnam for an overstay visa after working, living, and raising a Vietnamese child for the past 15 years. I've had so many messages from expats that are in exactly the same situation and found themselves stranded in Vietnam with very little help or guidance. So rather than replying to a million messages every day, I thought I'd make this little video. Firstly, why did I end up in Vietnam? Well, I lost both my parents in the early 2000s, so I decided to sell the family home and go and travel the world, working as a DJ, but also so that my parents could see the world with my eyes. After exactly 1,000 days of backpacking all over the globe, I landed in Vietnam for the first time ever in late September 2009, and I had a deep desire to settle down for a while as backpacking had took a huge toll on my health. Now, Vietnam seemed like an easy-going place and wasn't difficult to get a job or find a place to live with a bunch of fellow expats. As I started to fall in love with Vietnam and wished to call it my second home, I realized that working on 3-month visa extensions was not a wise option. So although I was making a steady income as a DJ, I got a job as an English teacher, like so many foreigners, and eventually got what's called a TRC, a temporary resident card. What that does, it enables you to stay in Vietnam for 3 years. Back then. You could exit and enter whenever you want without having to renew a visa every 3 months. I also got what's called a work permit, which gave me the ability to legally work for a company that was now sponsoring me, which meant I was getting a salary form and paying tax. So life was good. Easy and simple. I then met a lady in 2010 who became the mother of my child, who I love more than the world. And although we didn't get married, we did have a great relationship to start with. But eventually we broke up after 6 years and lived in separate homes. Now, so many foreigners go to Vietnam and they get married for the sake of the visa so they can stay there. Had I have got married, yes, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. But I don't get married just for the sake of visas. I have always remained and worked in Vietnam and supported my son since he was born. And bless him, he's adapted to having single parents and would mostly spend his time equally between the both of us. Now, I decided to leave teaching in 2016. I was just fed up and bored of it. So that meant I had to give up my TRC and my work permit that I'd had all the way since 2009. Why did I do that? Well, I just wanted to change of pace. So I got a job working for an established foreign company managing a pub, and I had a great time, 2 years. But during my employment, I was not given the new legal papers from that company. So instead, I just reverted back to doing my own 3-month visa extensions. The problem with doing that is you're not paying tax. And as much as it's great not paying tax, it should be the employer's responsibility to make sure that every employee is paying tax, all right? There wasn't much I could do about it. So back then, it was a very easy process to get a 3-month visa. You'd give your passport to a visa agent, they would stamp it for you and return the passport in a couple of days. You didn't even need to exit Vietnam. And apparently this was all above board. I did this for many years and I had no problem. I had to renew my new UK passport in 2018. Why is this an important factor in this little presentation? Because all the places that I'd lived in Vietnam from 2009 to 2018 were all registered to my old passport. And I will explain why that's relevant as we go forward. Now, in 2019, I then switched jobs again from a bar manager to become a general manager of a local restaurant that was owned by a friend. And they treated me exceptionally well. I was paid well, and I was promised that I would get the new legal papers I required to give me the peace of mind so I could stay and remain in Vietnam and support my son. It was all just a matter of time to process. So in the meantime, I still continued to extend my visa every 3 months with the same visa agent I had used for many years with zero problems from immigration. In March 2021, Vietnam suffered immense and sudden lockdowns due to the outbreak of COVID in Asia. And sadly, the restaurant that I worked for was one of the first areas to completely close down. Now, in fairness to my employers, they did gracefully pay me 2 months' salary, which I thought would be an adequate amount to survive during the lockdowns. And then we could go back to work. I was out of work since then lockdowns for nearly 7 months. And I was stuck in a luxury apartment with no rent reduction because my old landlord had just sold it to a new landlord and I'd already signed a new 12-month contract. So basically, all my savings got drained and this left me in a very, very bad mental state. And for the first time in my life, I was very, very fragile in a foreign country. So eventually I found a new job teaching again, but as I'd only agreed to do a full semester of teaching, the company would not sponsor me for a TRC or a work permit unless I signed up for 2 years. So again, I was paying for my own 3-month extensions, saving money and recovering from the lockdowns and actually getting back on my feet. After my luxury apartment contract was up finally, I then moved to a smaller apartment paying less money, and I met a new partner. She was also struggling with finding work and making money. So we basically supported each other through a very difficult time. Then my teaching contract also finished, but I managed to find another job working for another restaurant. And they agreed to sponsor my new papers, get me a TRC and get me a new work permit. But there's always a grace period when you start a new company. They need to know if you're hireable. So that company, I'm not going to mention any names, but that company was the last company who stamped my passport instead of using the visa agent. Because once they stamp your passport the first time, the second time they can apply for your work permit and get you a TRC. So that was all supposed to happen. Everything seemed to be getting back on track at that time. And then we had the second wave of the lockdowns, which came to Vietnam. I was forced to leave that new job and the company actually closed down because the lockdowns just destroyed all the little businesses. So me and my girlfriend at the time found ourselves yet again, no money, no jobs, and facing the actual reality of living on the streets in Saigon. I shit you not. My ex-girlfriend had a client who was very generous and she knew that we were both struggling. So she offered us both to move out of the smaller apartment and into an old family house in a completely different neighborhood. And this house, nobody lived in it for 10 years. They had no hot water, no air conditioning. We were using buckets to clean the toilet. It didn't matter. At that time, I just needed somewhere to live to get back on my feet. Now, bear in mind that my new passport had only ever showed that I'd been registered to first the luxury apartment and then the smaller apartment since 2018. The rest of my history in Vietnam since 2009 was only on my old passport. So with no jobs or income, we took this generous offer to stay in this house for free and we moved in that house in January 2022. Typically, at the very same time that we moved, we both needed to renew our visas again. So I needed to renew my visa after losing my job with that company. So I went back to another agent now and we gave our passports to that agent right before the Lunar New Year. Now, what does that mean for people who've never lived in Asia? It means that everywhere closes for 2 weeks. So I gave my passport to an agent. He told me when the Lunar New Year, the Tet holiday is over, we'll get our passports back and we'll have another 3 months extension. In January 2022, that same month, suddenly the government came out stating they are no longer giving 3-month visa extensions. And I said, why not? Because I've been living there since 2009. We'd never had an issue. Apparently, the reason they stopped doing that is they didn't want foreigners working, living in Vietnam on 3-month tourist visas and not paying tax, which makes absolute complete sense. But for me, in my situation, I needed a visa so that I could have 3 months to find a new job and get money and support my kid. So in my case, it was the worst decision of all time. We'd moved out of the small apartment. We needed to give our passports to our new landlord, who's the generous woman who gave us the free house. Because we were now 2 weeks over a visa, she couldn't take the passports to register with the local police in the new house, even though that we were staying there for free. So she told us she would find a solution, and for now, just to remain in that house, and we'll wait and see what happens. So basically, during the whole time I'd been in Vietnam, this was the very first time I'd ever overstayed a visa, the very first time I had no job or income, and I was now unable to prove where I was actually living with the police. So from that time moving forward, immigration would have zero record of me living in Vietnam since I left the small apartment in January 2022. So like anyone in this situation, with a life and a child and a partner in a foreign country, you naturally panic and assume the worst and fear that they will kick you out. You know, what am I going to do? I'm 45 years old. I've sold my house in England. I can't go back to England. It was terrifying, right? So I did try to go to immigration on several occasions in the year of 2022, but the office was absolutely slam packed. There was literally hundreds and hundreds of people queuing outside the office, and there was absolutely no chance of getting to the window before the office would close for lunch or close at 4 o'clock. So I just said to myself, okay, I will wait for the people. I'll wait for the queues to calm down. This is a fact. I'm not lying, because it was in the local newspapers highlighting how many people were affected from the sudden change of policies, and especially after the crazy lockdowns, which to me seemed like a very unfair and cruel policy to change at such a dramatic time. There was a statement made in the Vietnamese newspaper in the year 2022 that if anyone was overstayed due to COVID, then there would be a grace period of, say, 6 months where you didn't get penalized. But you see, in our case, mine and my girlfriend's, we had overstayed after all of the lockdowns, but we had overstayed because of the lockdowns. We could have simply left and come back, but we literally had no cash to leave between us, and we were living in a free house, basically getting free food off the local people. It was that bad, right? So finally, I did get to go to immigration in late 2022, and they told me that I needed to bring the business owner who stamped my passport, the last restaurant. She needed to assist me to the immigration office, and she would have to explain why she'd sponsored me but not got me a work permit. Now, you see, we were doing that process, but the business closed down due to COVID. But immigration don't care about that. They don't listen to that. They just get you and you're done, all right? So I had a bit of an issue now because that business had closed down. I was no longer speaking to the owner, and I no longer had contact to the owner, but they requested that I must bring that person to the immigration office to explain the situation. At that time, I couldn't provide the party or the document that was needed to assist at immigration for them to even consider how to solve my overstay problem, which was now around 6 months. So you see, what I found extremely frustrating was the fact that I'd been to immigration, they already knew I was 6 months over, and they let me walk out and asked me to come back with further documentation. In any other country, surely they would have done something about it right there and then. I then found a new job working for a school that was owned by a friend, and they were fully aware of my situation, that I was overstayed a visa. But because they knew me and they knew I had a son, they were kind enough to support me and give me a job even though I had no visa. But we all felt very confident that over time we could find a solution for me to remain in the country and support my child. We found and trusted an external agent to help my situation, and I paid a lot of money to listen to their advice, and eventually I managed to obtain a work permit via the new school. Now, I was told by this agent that if I got accepted for a work permit, then leaving Vietnam and getting back in would be much easier, and then I could apply for a TRC once I'd got a new 3-month business visa on re-entering Vietnam. Now, afraid and completely confused by now, and all out of options, I paid top dollar to listen to this agent's advice, and I finally got my new work permit. And once I got my new work permit, I was over the moon, and I felt super confident that the rest of the process now would be super easy. And guess what? That agent I used screwed me over for several reasons. And he also added a few additional fees that made zero sense to me. He also withheld my passport and refused to give me my passport back unless I paid these additional fees. So all the money I'd saved, I spent on this agent. And I want to say right now, if you're even thinking about using an agent to get out of an overstay situation, avoid them like the plague. I was clearly a guinea pig and he had no idea what he was doing. And I lost all my money right there and then. So when I knew I had this work permit, I went to the immigration with my new proud paperwork. I was questioned then as to how I had managed to get a work permit with no visa. And that was the thing that I'd asked the agent at the beginning. So this new plan had completely backfired on me. And the fact that I'd gone to immigration now and told them that I was actually working illegally also backfired and made the situation even worse. So after several trips back and forth between both immigration offices, and for the record, you only need to go to the one on Win Tri Street, not on Wintermin Kai anymore, I had numerous translators, because also a good piece of advice is never go there on your own. If you go there on your own, they don't know how to speak really good English, they get frustrated and they just don't want to deal with you, and they'll kick you out and tell you to come back and deal with somebody else. But the most important thing is go to Wing Try, get yourself an officer and make sure they're your officer. Try and get the Zalo number and get the name, so the next time you go, you don't have to queue up for ages. You just ask for the officer's name, they will scan your passport and they will come down. I should have done that the first time I went. After 18 times of going to immigration and waiting 2 to 3 hours every time with no clear resolution, I finally figured that out. If you don't do that, you're going to basically have to explain your case to about 10 different officers every time, and none of them are going to want to help you because it's just too complicated and too time consuming. They would rather pass you off to the next person. I was asked by my new contact, the immigration officer, to return with many papers, and I did exactly what they asked for. It is completely tedious. I got a paper from the British consulate, which cost me about $50 to $60. They told me, the consulate, that they cannot get involved with the final say of the Vietnamese immigration. But the point of the letter from the consulate is to express that they support, that I knew I'd done something wrong, and if anything, I just wanted to go home. So just try to ease the process. The most frustrating thing was when I took that letter the first time, they just threw it down on the table and it was almost like it didn't matter. So they're going to do everything they can to make you feel frustrated. But trust me, if you just do each step that they ask, you will eventually get a result. So my case was extremely complicated. And once the officer had processed everything, I was told finally that I'd actually broke 3 rules. And I would need 3 parties to accompany me at the visa office. I would not be able to fix this situation on my own, and especially not with no agent. Penalty number 1, I'd overstayed without registering to the local police. So now they required my new landlord to come to the office and explain why they had helped me. Now, the problem was that that person was not in Vietnam anymore. They were in Japan taking care of their father who was dying of cancer. So I couldn't even get hold of that landlord. They weren't answering my messages. I showed that to immigration. So immigration, after several times of going there back and forth, they said they will try and track her down for me. The second party was they wanted my old employee from the restaurant to come to the office and explain why they had hired me with no paperwork. And of course, we were going to process all of that before the lockdown. I didn't want to get them involved, to be honest, because I'd stopped speaking to them and I no longer had the contact. So immigration told me they would investigate and try to get hold of them. The third party now was that my new school would need to come to the office and explain why they had hired me with no visa. So basically, immigration wanted me to throw the 3 people who had saved me from living on the street under the bus so I could save my own ass. So let's just say, me personally, I was a little bit loose to pursue any of the 3 parties, but I did try. However, immigration did eventually get hold of all 3. So after nearly giving up hope that I could remain in Vietnam, as none of the parties would come forward, I then just told immigration that I would accept to be deported, pay the fine, thinking that I could just leave. I even arranged a leaving party within 2 weeks. But how wrong was I? I went back to the office to tell them, okay, deport me, let me pay the fine, with a Vietnamese lawyer. As from October the 24th, 2024, I'd now lost my job again and was not legally allowed to work at all. So I'm just waiting around, trying to escape Vietnam. I was also under immense pressure from my landlord to move out because now the local police had been told I was living there without their knowing. I was told by immigration after 21 visits that I would need to pay 80 million dong, which is close to £3,000, to leave Vietnam, which I agreed to. And luckily for me, I have got good friends and solid family in the UK and all over the world that set up a GoFundMe and they raised me the money to get me out. But the problem was, even though I had the money now and I wanted to leave, I still required the 3 parties to sign the papers before I could exit. Finally, immigration managed to get hold of my last employer who stamped my passport, and they came to the office with me. I agreed to pay the full fine. All they had to do was sign a paper and make sure that I actually left Vietnam. So that was it. After all of that, I only needed 1 party to come forward, not all 3. Once all that was done, the papers needed to be assessed, but then it got passed up to the big people in immigration at the top of the chain, and I had to wait a further month to actually for them to agree that everything was legit and to be given an exit date. Now, once I got an exit date, I had to sell all my stuff in Vietnam. I've left my son there with his mum with hope to bring him back to the UK. And then the last step was I had to go and meet the immigration officer at the airport. He signed some papers. I had to go and take a photo in an office in the airport. I got an actual official letter to say that I've been deported and I'm not allowed back in Vietnam for 3 years. And to be honest, the immigration officer was fun. He was nice. He was friendly. He was obviously didn't really want me to get kicked out. But the rules are the rules. I just don't think they knew exactly what the rules were before my case. But now 100% they know how to process. So I feel very unfortunate for all those that are still stuck in Vietnam. But yeah, I'm home. I'm not a criminal. It's not on a criminal record. Luckily for me, I've been able to adjust to living in the UK. I miss my son terribly, but I'm hoping to get him here for school this summer. So look, I hope this helps. All I'll say to you is just go to immigration, get yourself a contact, and don't listen to any agent. And you're going to need at least 4 grand somehow to exit. All right. Be safe and good luck. Ajam out. See you later.